everyone, welcome back to today's episode. Today, I have the pleasure of talking to Dr. Jennie Byrne. She lives to connect the dots between people and ideas in new and unexpected ways. She has strong people skills and she enjoys bringing psychological savvy and emotional intelligence to complicated problems. And that is why I decided to ask Dr. Jennie to come on our show today because of her psychological savvy. So today we're going to do a variety of things, but the main things that I wanted to focus on is we're going to talk about leaders and what key characteristics must leaders have to foster a positive team environment. When you are trying to deploy something, a new process to your team, how do you get the team to buy into that process? And then what are some unique challenges that women face compared to men and how to address them? So we're going to talk about all that and much more. So stay tuned to today's episode. Good morning, Dr. Jennie. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Rosie. Thank you.
Great. Okay, so obviously you are a physician, you are a brain and behavior specialist, you're an author, and as you know, the podcast is focused around women in the corporate space trying to advance in their careers. And you have a book that you wrote actually during the pandemic. Is that correct?
Yep, yeah, that's right.
And it's called Work Smart. And so one of the things that I think we still need a lot of help in the corporate space is helping leaders become better leaders. As you well know, leaders are stuck in the middle. They have to report up, and then they have a team that's reporting to them, but they in turn have a responsibility to develop their team. So let's start there. Like, how would you suggest a leader become a better leader?
Great question. I think, first of all, you're right. Leadership is hard, especially when you're caught in the middle. And even if you're the CEO, the reality is you report typically to a board, or, everybody has somebody that they have to report up to. So I guess one of the things I hear leaders struggling with the most recently, especially like the last couple of years, kind of during the pandemic and then since then, has been around empathy. And everybody really wants to show up with empathy. And that's become a buzzword, which is excellent. As a psychiatrist and a therapy, totally believe in the power of empathy. But what I see most leaders not realize, and this is something that we train in as psychotherapists, is that you only have a limited amount of empathy in a given day. Some people naturally may have more than others just because of your temperament. But in reality, even a psychotherapist who uses empathy for a living, they have a limited amount, and they have to learn how much they have to give in a day. And honestly, as a leader, it requires a lot of self-awareness, a lot of self-care to show up in an empathetic way. It takes a lot. Mm-hmm. And there are no shortcuts. I mean, you really, if you show up sleep deprived and tired and maybe hungry and irritable, like, you can't just flip a switch and become an empathetic person if you're not in a good space yourself. So this idea of having like awareness into yourself and how much empathy you have on a given day, because you have life going on in the background. Some days are going to be better than others. And then to think very strategically about where you're going to use your empathy for the day. And you might only have a little bit. So you might have to some days be very careful about where you use it.
That makes a lot of sense, because I used to be a manager in the corporate world, and you're absolutely right. Like, when you start your day, especially when you start your day and you think you have your day set or scheduled, and then some fire happens and then everything goes sideways, that kind of puts you in a frazzled state. So I know with your book, Work Smart, is there maybe a thing or two that the leaders can do when they're running out of empathy, almost running out of empty, and they still have a half a day to go, or maybe sometimes a full day, depending on when this fire happens?
Definitely. I mean, one thing is, I also see most leaders, they don't comfortable with taking a couple minutes away. So
Mm.
as a leader, you do have the power to say, hey, I need 30 minutes to myself. And most leaders don't feel that they have that power. But in reality, once you've reached leadership levels, that's one of the benefits is you probably do have 30 minutes that you could take. And then whatever helps you get in a better state of mind, whether that's petting the dog if you're at home, taking a walk, closing your eyes and lying on your couch, reading. I mean, anything that works for you. So I think the time management piece, realizing, well, first of all, fires happen almost every day.
Mhm.
So a really good practice is to just build the buffers into your day for the fires.
Mm.
So if fires tend to hit in the morning, maybe every morning at 10:30 to 11, you have a block of time that's fires, putting out fires. Like that would be your best practice. But if that fails, you can take a couple minutes to yourself. So that's one thing, time management. But the other thing would be, let's say you only have a little bit of empathy because there's just so much going on and you're totally frazzled. You took 30 minutes, you're still kind of frazzled. Showing a little vulnerability and modeling as a leader to others how they can cope when they feel frazzled. Because if you feel frazzled, they probably do. And saying, look, I just wanted to let you know we have our one-to-one scheduled. I have a lot of stuff going on here in the background. I really want to be fully present for you. We can meet, or if you prefer, we could reschedule a little later, and I probably will be able to be a little bit more present with you. And modeling that vulnerability, but in a way that's not, breaking down and crying with your
Right.
direct reports, but like just
Right.
saying, hey, I have stuff going on in the background. It's not really relevant or important for you to know all the details, but I just may not be 100% right now. And I value you and I want to be 100% for you.
Oh my gosh, I love that so much because I think one of the things that lacks in the corporate world is showing that humanity, that
Right.
vulnerability. And because sometimes I think when people become managers or leaders, they feel that they have to, portray a certain persona that they're tough and they can lead and whatever. But I really like that suggestion of just being vulnerable. And who wants to have their one-on-one when their manager is frazzled or they're not there? Like,
Right.
you shouldn't want to. You're like, okay, let's reschedule, and then we'll take it from there. So I really like that suggestion.
Yeah, and I think the vulnerability piece is something I've certainly had to work on over time. I had trouble with that at the beginning, especially as a doctor, a physician. We have this idea we're supposed to be perfect all the time, zero mistakes. Every day you have to be 100%. So that's been hard for me. And I think if somebody's listening and they're struggling with that, like, yeah, but I don't know. One frame that helped me make progress on vulnerability was the idea that people are watching me and I'm modeling. And so whatever I do, that's going to help them feel like they can do the same thing. So when I frame it that way in my head, like practice what you preach, others are watching you, that made it a little easier for me to take better care of myself and to be more vulnerable.
Right. I know that I've heard the term psychological safety, and
Mm-hmm.
I know what it means. I know you know what it means, but let's talk a little bit about um, psychological safety, or what you recommend from the therapist perspective. How leaders can use that psychological safety concept to make their teams feel more that they can approach the manager, that they can actually communicate. Because I'll just share with you, when I was a manager, when I rolled something out, my team
Mm-hmm.
like, yeah, that's great, we love it. And then like a few days later, I hear all the grumblings of they didn't like that. What did you do? I'm like, they told me they liked it. So, how can we truly establish that communication and comfort between the direct reports and the leader?
Some things that I have found helpful for that, because you're right. And the higher you go, the less people tell you the truth,
Yes.
right? And it's hard to be a CEO. If anyone's listening who's a CEO, when you're the CEO, like people don't tell you the truth, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's a problem. So as a manager of any level, getting honest feedback is going to be tough because there is a power differential. Like that's just natural human behavior, that there is a power differential that corporate, especially, ladders and all that. So how do you get around that? There's a couple things I really recommend. First of all, modeling again. Like if you find an opportunity to model that, like when you're saying, oh, I had to go talk to my boss, the CEO, and it was a really hard conversation. There was something they said and I had a different point of view, and that was really hard for me, and I had to kind of figure out how to do that. And sometimes sharing stories just proactively and modeling it again makes you more human and a little easier to approach, and also shows that you have to work on that and you realize it's hard, and so you're validating for them that it's hard for them to come to you. So that's, if you find opportunities to tell stories, I think that's good. But a really practical thing to do is just bake in the assumption of not agreeing. So first of all, giving people choices that are not binary, like we're doing this and we're not. If there's opportunities to say we could do this or this or this, by changing it from one option to two or three options, that will automatically foster a more balanced feedback of what are the pros and cons of each. When you present it as a binary, like we're doing this and we're not, that automatically shuts down that conversation. So if you can provide choices, that's a good way to do it. Another good way to do it would be going through an exercise, like a semi-structured exercise of feedback, where you say, okay, on my team, I have 4 people. 2 of you, I want you to think of all the positive things about this. And 2 of you, I want you to tear this to pieces and tell me all the things that are terrible and that are going to go wrong. And actively tell someone that you want them to tear it down. Sometimes that opens up the door for people to give you more honest feedback. That's another trick I've done sometimes. And then a third way would be when you're going through something new that you are going to do. So you're not really giving them a choice, right? You're just saying this is the way it is, which that we have to do sometimes. Giving people the opportunity to share their concerns and how confident they are that this will be successful, and giving them a place to register their concerns, like even documented. Like, here's a decision I have made as the leader, but I want to hear everybody's concerns, and then we can document that kind of for posterity. Sometimes that gives people permission to be skeptical and to feel like they can document it, so then there's less of that behind your back chitter chatter, because you've at least given a venue to kind of put it on the record.
Got it. I really loved your suggestion of giving them at least 3 choices, if you can, if possible, because you're right. Like when you say it's either this or this, and then they kind of feel stuck. But if you say it's this, or this, and then posterior to that, now let's kind of go one step further, and you 3 look at it positively, and you 3 look at all the, possible pitfalls. I love that, because again, it not only does it give them the ability to communicate back to you, but they're buying into the process. And when they buy into the process, then, okay, guys, well, we collectively came up with this together. So they can't be like, well, you implemented this or they implemented this. So I really like that. So I know you work with both men and women, right?
Yep.
And so one of the things that I've always asked people, what is it that women don't do in their career development that men automatically do or do naturally? Have you been able to ascertain like 2 or 3 things that women are not proactively doing the way men do in their careers?
Yeah, and I'm not the first person to think this. I've, thought about this for myself, but a couple things I've noticed in my career in particular have been men typically are brought up to have a growth and opportunity mindset, and women are brought up to have a risk mitigation and budgeting mindset. So this shows up for me and my finances. It showed up at work. And so men, when they get interviewed, right, get asked questions about growth. Women get asked questions about risk mitigation. And for example, this was back in the day. I don't think, hopefully this doesn't happen anymore. But when I was interviewing to do an MD PhD program, actually more than one of my interviewers asked me how many kids I was planning to have and when I was planning to have them.
Oh my gosh.
So I hope that doesn't happen anymore. But like, is it just an example of risk mitigation, right? They're like, well, already thinking about me as a risk and how like to mitigate me as a risk. Whereas they would never, I don't think they would ever ask a man that. So that's one thing. The other thing I noticed that women struggle with is, I don't want to say asking for help. There's a lot of societal expectations and assumptions around women and their role as a mother or a wife or a daughter. And I see women really feeling that societal pressure very heavily and not thinking of alternatives. So like, for example, a common one is, cooking. And what's the impact of grocery shopping, meal planning, cooking, cleanup on your career? And if you love cooking, maybe you want to do that. But if you don't, most women are like, well, then what's going to happen? We're going to eat out. Maybe my husband, my partner's going to do it. And they don't take the next step is like, well, what are the other options? So for example, in our household, we have a household employee, and part of her job is to do all that because it's a significant impact on my ability. I don't like to cook, first of all, and it's a significant impact on my ability to be successful in my career. So there's a lot of this like household labor or roles, traditional roles that women they just assume they have to be responsible for it, and they kind of don't get out of their own way. And if a benefit of moving up is that in theory you make more money, and so you have the ability to have more options when you're making more money. But women tend to not think about that. They still assume that they have to do everything. So that's one. And then I guess the third one, which has always been really hard for me, is around pay, around salary, bonus, raises, asking for money, negotiating money. I mean, I was very uncomfortable with that for many, many years. And it probably did stunt my earnings for a number of years, where now I'm trying to catch up in some ways. But I think a lot of women, I mean, it's just really not taught to us, and we're just very uncomfortable. And it's hard for us to find the right way and something that feels good to us that doesn't feel like really aggressive.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I agree with everything that you said. Now, I also think there's so many food services out there that you can select like maybe 2 meals a week or whatever, and people forget about that. So they send you all the ingredients, and you might have to buy the meat or whatever. But I mean, that's also an option. And it is interesting. There are seasons when I'm just like so focused on cooking, and then it's like after a while I'm just like, oh my gosh, it's so much work. So you're absolutely right. It'll take a whole Sunday for me to do the whole meal prep for the week, and that's literally 4 to 5 hours that I'm cooking. And not that my husband doesn't do anything, but he's doing other stuff around the house. Hey, everyone. I am so excited to announce that the Unlock the Leader Within membership is finally launched and live. This segment is brought to you by our very own No Woman Left Behind. The Unlock the Leader Within membership was designed to empower you in your corporate career to advance your career with confidence. Confidence is so lacking these days. When you join the Unlock the Leader Within membership, you will gain the ability to become a high performer. You will have your custom career roadmap and more than anything. And the thing that's most exciting to me is that we will build an amazing community of like-minded, ambitious professional women that are there to help and support and learn from each other. This incredible membership is up and running, so check it out. Go ahead and scan the QR code over here. Or if you're listening to this episode, go to the episode website and click on the unlock the Leader Within membership to check it out. And now back to our episode. So tell me a little bit more about your book. So Work Smart, tell me, how did you come up with the idea? Like, what prompted it? And tell me about what are the like 2 or 3 like main things from your book.
Yeah, so it was a really fun adventure. So my first book did a hybrid publishing, which is kind of another story. But the idea came from, pre-pandemic, like most people, I went to offices, I worked in hospitals. I had just started to do work at home with some travel, actually, pre-pandemic. But like my sister had been doing this for 10, 15 years. So I kind of knew that there were other ways to work, but she seemed in the minority. So when the pandemic hit, like most people, I was like, what do we do now?
Mm-hmm.
And I was looking for answers, and I was like reading, and I was like, okay, IT is going to give me the answer, or HR is going to give me the answer, or somebody's going to tell me how to do this thing. And there was just no answers. And so, just out of a practical need to figure it out, I started researching from my lens, which is a brain and behavior lens.
Mm-hmm.
And in the process of doing that research and then applying that research to what I was doing in a company that I just co-founded during the pandemic, I kind of really geeked out on the topic, and I did some interviews with other people, and I got really passionate about it. And then the opportunity came, and someone said, I think you should write a book. And I was like, okay, I'll write a book. So I kind of just somewhat impulsively said yes to writing the book. But, since I've written it and talking to people, everybody is still reeling from the massive acceleration of how work has changed. So it's really, the reality is it's never going back, right?
Right.
And most of these trends were already happening, but the pandemic just put it into super drive. So I think the key parts of the book that I saw were the thing that everybody misses and wants in work, and this was pre-pandemic, is human connectedness and empathy. And I think that's what people really crave deep down.
Yeah.
But when you ask them, what do I need help with? It's more practical things like, how do I communicate virtually? How do I plan my time? I can't sit on Zoom meetings all day long, but I can't go back to the office. And those are the questions that come to the surface first. So I think that the 2 big things that are foundational to getting to the good stuff, the connectedness stuff, are around time management and communication. So I think those are the kind of foundational pillars upon which you can build the connectedness and empathy that everybody is craving. So the book kind of breaks it down in that way. I talk about time management. Where did our concepts of the 9 to 5 come from? Like, people aren't even aware where that came from.
Where did that come from?
So it turns out 9 to 5 came from the turn of the century, 1900s, early 1900s, at the Ford factory. Prior to that, people who worked in factories worked around the clock 7 days a week. And there were some social anthropologists who proposed an 8-hour workday, and everybody laughed at them. They said, that's absolutely absurd. But when Ford came, he looked at those ideas and he thought, well, I really want to get top talent for my factory. If I reduce the work hours to 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, I bet I can get really good talent. And that's what he did. And he was really successful. So the 9 to 5 was born at the Ford factory floor. But before that, if you go back and look in the 1800s, for example, first of all, if you were wealthy, you didn't work. Leisure was considered the pinnacle of achievement. Working was considered low class. So that's obviously totally different now, right? In our cult of busyness world. And then the factory workers were just slaving away, working around the clock. So you had this society where everybody wanted to escape work and not work at all, but most people were really in these terrible working conditions.
Right.
So nobody was 9 to 5 And by the way, nobody went to offices in the 1800s unless you were in the government. Most people, professionals, worked at home. So physicians might have a home office, and then you go do house calls. Lawyers probably had a home office. This idea of going to the office also came from the Ford factory floor.
Oh, okay. Well, thank you, Ford. I mean, in a way, yes, thank you, because obviously they were able to identify problems where people were being abused. So, that's a good thing. But I do agree, like the connectedness is the main thing that people crave because,
Yes.
like I know people that go to work specifically just to socialize because
Right.
otherwise they're isolated. And I did want to ask you about, we talked about this a little bit as far as Zoom meetings, when you're
Mhm.
meeting to meeting to meeting. At the very beginning, and interestingly enough, before COVID, we had teleconferences. We
Yeah.
never saw each other, right? It was just a phone call. And then the pandemic came, and all of a sudden, everybody's on camera. And so now I've noticed that unless you're specifically needed to be on camera, people turn their cameras off. And I heard you say that that's a good thing. So I'd like to expand a little bit about why do you think that's a good thing when you're in meetings with cameras off?
So, as always, the devil's in the detail. So, the reason that Zoom calls are so overwhelming to be on, or and Zoom or Team, whatever, video calls all day long, is that your brain is reacting to a very unnatural situation. So, right now, for example, I have you on speaker view. I'm sitting, more than an arm's length distance. I see you're not like super close. I can see your body language from here up. So when you're on video, that's kind of the healthiest version of the other person that your brain can process. But most people use video calls where you see everybody at the same time.
Right.
And basically your brain has cells, face cells that are designed to look at human faces. And it is very alarming to your brain to see 20 faces staring at it, like from very unnatural positions all at the same time. So you're setting off a cascade of sympathetic activation and chemicals to your body telling you that something's wrong.
Mm.
So your brain is using a lot of glucose to try to like manage the stimulation, and then your body is getting flooded with fight or flight chemicals because if you imagine an animal in the jungle and all of a sudden you see 10 eyes like right on top of you, we're animals at the end of the day, and so it's very alarming to your body. So the Zoom fatigue or the video fatigue is a real phenomenon, and there's some research in the book about it. Your brain is using a lot of resources to try to manage that dissonance, and then your body is getting negatively impacted. So best practice for video, I would say, is get on the call on video, say hello, and then give permission for people to go off video. And then maybe come back on right at the end to just wave goodbye. That's that's kind of best of both worlds. You get to see everybody, wave, go off. Now, there are some exceptions to that. Some research has shown that women in particular, other underrepresented groups tend to feel more scrutinized visually on camera as well as in person. So they might like if you put your self view on, for example, that's really bad for your brain. So I always recommend turn off. I mean, maybe look, make sure you don't have food in your teeth, but then turn the self view off because your brain also has mirror cells, and you will not be able to not look at yourself. And especially it's been shown for women and other groups that feel very scrutinized with their appearance. That will also trigger that stress response in your body. So having said that, think about your team. If you have women or other people that may feel very scrutinized visually, you may want to switch to audio only for many of your meetings. So again, it's a little bit more about your team. If you have a team full of extroverts, who love being on camera, you might want to stay on camera. It's really more about like who's on your team and what is the purpose of the meeting. And what are, if you're just showing slides, do you need to see people's faces? Probably not.
Right.
So you have to kind of understand the best practice, but then take it to the next level. Like, what's the point of this meeting? What are we trying to do? Who is here? And then explicitly saying at the beginning, okay, for this meeting, I'm going to say we go off camera because we're just going to show slides. I'd like you to use the, raise hand. If it's a big group of people, you just kind of spend a minute and go through the norms of the meeting right at the beginning. And that's also very helpful.
Got it. I've also heard, and I want to know if you agree with this or not. When you are on Zoom, your brain is so taxed that it can't really think, or you're not as creative as if you had, the cameras off. So is that something that you would agree with?
I've heard people say that you can't do creative work remotely, and I would definitely challenge that. Now, whether camera on or off, I like to use for creative work. I like to use some sort of collaboration tool that both people can be doing simultaneously. I personally love to whiteboard. So if you use Zoom, there is a whiteboard feature where it will take the faces off and you can do a whiteboard together. I also like to use Miro, which is a tool.
Miro,
yeah, I'm kind of obsessed. They make fun of me. I'm a little obsessed with Miro. If you're not a whiteboard person, you can do other interactive things that don't require looking at faces. So again, I think it's probably dependent on the person and what works best for them and the team. But to be creative, I would probably use some sort of interactive tool.
Got it. That makes sense. And I know that with the men that you work, can you say, I mean, men still have struggles, right? Are their struggles that much different than women? And strictly when we're talking about career advancement, like what are some of the struggles that they deal with that women don't deal with?
I think in the same way that women have assumptions and societal pressures to do certain things, men are the same, right? So I'm thinking of my husband, I'm laughing. Some of the ones like he would tell me about were there's a culture with men typically of like going to the bar and drinking or playing golf or like doing these other, guy activities to build trust and relationships. And for people who don't drink, that's not great. Maybe you don't like to drink. Maybe you are not wanting to have addiction, so you don't want to drink. Maybe you're trying to watch your diet, but sometimes that's really hard for them. I also think it's interesting now that more companies are offering family paternity leave. That can elicit a very strong reaction if men want to take family leave or paternity leave. I've seen that men really stigmatize each other for that. Which is kind of interesting. And then I think right now, a lot of the men I work with, excuse me, who are, probably a little older in their 40s, 50s, maybe, white men typically who were maybe in leadership positions. I see them really struggling to be empathetic with how others want to work together and in a very kind way. Like they're like, I really just don't understand. Like they'll call me and they'll be like, Jennie, like, can you just explain to me? Like, I don't understand. Why don't people want to come in the office? I don't understand. I'm planning a big dinner. Why doesn't everyone want to come? I don't like in a kind way. They're trying to wrap their head around this new way of working and people having their own needs and speaking up about I don't have childcare, because before childcare was always a problem, but nobody talked about it, right? Like you just kind of like quietly. I mean, I laugh like we had our kids when they went to pre-K, and this isn't great as a doctor, but there were days when they had a little fever, and I just gave them some meds before they went to school because it would buy me 4 hours.
Oh yeah.
Full confession.
That as parents.
And that's not great, right? But like that's how it was, and I never told I never went to work and said, oh, my kid has a fever, I'm struggling to figure that. No, I just like, zip,
Yeah.
I just was like, how can I rearrange my day so I can get it all done in 4 hours? So it's always been a problem, but now people are talking about it and they're saying like, I don't have childcare. I don't want to come to the office. I don't want to go to a trip. I don't want to go to a dinner. And the men are really like, just like, I don't understand. Why is childcare such an issue all of a sudden? And a lot of them came from traditional households where their wife or partner stays at home. And so they really just have never honestly thought about it. So
Wow.
I see them struggling in a way, like in a kind way, often, sometimes in an angry and frustrated way, but more than often in a kind way. Like, I don't understand. What do people want? Like, why are things so different now? And nobody, again, you go higher up, people don't tell you the truth. So these white men who are in these very high positions, like people aren't telling them the truth. They say other things, right? And so I always try to be well, I don't know, I'm the messenger, the truth bearer, whatever you want to call it. But I try to explain it to them in a way, because I know that they're really doing it out of like a kind place. They're not doing it to be mean.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. And actually, it gives me a lot of comfort, I guess, that the men that you're working with are trying to understand, that they're calling you and say, hey, Jennie, explain this to me because I don't get it. I think that's really a good thing that's happening. And it's good to know that they have struggles. I had never thought about the alcohol, like if someone doesn't
Mm-hmm.
for whatever reason, and they're required or they're expected to go and have a couple beers and they drink whatever soda or water. The question is like, aren't you drinking? Because I'm
Yeah.
not a drinker, and I even get that question very often. And I'm like, no, I don't drink for no particular reason at all, but I just don't care for alcohol. So it's and I used to like my margaritas, but I just can't, as I'm getting older, they just don't agree with me anymore.
Right.
So, but I do, I can appreciate how they would have different struggles. All right, Dr. Jennie, well, this has been a really great conversation. Is there maybe one tip that you really want to leave with the women that are struggling in the corporate world to try to advance? Like, what's one thing that you think they can really focus on to get them to at least start taking action?
Oh, what a great question. I think maybe sometimes a helpful tip, am I going to be working? Time moves quickly. And so sometimes that frame help clarifies like what really matters. Is
Mm.
it advancement on a corporate ladder, like getting a title? Is it money? Is it respect? Is it flexibility? Is it, autonomy? Like what do I really want? Because I think American corporate life has created these ladders of titles. But the reality is they're all made up, right? Like,
Yeah.
let's be honest. I know my husband and his company, he literally was in charge of making them up. So they're artificial. Now, that may be your ticket to what you want, whether it's more money, more freedom, more whatever. But the ladder in of itself is kind of an illusion. And if you buy into the ladder, you're kind of handing over the power to the organization to tell you what you're worth. So I think my biggest tip would be, my biggest aha was kind of like, this ladder is an illusion. What do I really want? And what's the best path to get there? Is it going up this ladder? Or maybe I go sideways. Maybe I just say, I want to do something totally different and throw it out there. So advancement should be something that it means something to you. Like if you imagine I only have this many days left in my life, like what really matters? And then just to say, like, is this ladder like really what's going to get me there? Or is this ladder really just going to slow me down? And I need to kind of veer off in a different direction or try something different.
Wow, that is pure gold right there, Dr. Jennie, because you're absolutely right. The concept of the corporate ladder is artificial. It is man-made. It is made up. And what I heard you say is that it really comes down to the individual and what's important to them, because it could just be that they want to make a contribution and feel fulfilled while being able to take care of their families comfortably. It could be that. So
It
I
could
think,
be anything. And I think the truth, the dirty truth that you don't hear is, and I hear this from women who have made it to the top rung, and then they're like, I'm here, and I'm like, I don't feel the way I thought I would feel. And so they spent this whole time getting to that top rung, and they're just like, wait a minute, I don't feel respected. I don't feel autonomous. I don't feel like I have money. So the dirty secret is that the people at the top, it may not actually feel as great as it may look from the bottom, right? So
mm-hmm.
know thyself, I really do believe is the first step. And knowing how you want to feel and what's important to you. And that is different for different people.
Sure.
And I love to work. I'll just be honest. Like, I know you're not supposed to say that, but I love to work. When I'm doing fulfilling work, I feel great. I don't really want to retire. Maybe I'll do less work, or maybe I'll change my mind. But I think there are women out there too that just like to work, and they're
Absolutely.
not doing it for the money, and that's totally fine. We don't have to pretend that we don't like work if we do, and vice versa. We don't have to pretend we do like it if we don't. So know
Right.
thyself, and as you get older, I guess that's one of the nice things. It's a little easier to to get to
Absolutely.
know yourself and ignore what other people say.
Well, and like you also said, we don't know. I mean, life is so short. I'm 54 now, and you think like the average, woman
Right.
lifespan is like 70. I'm like, okay, well, I have 25 more years. Like, what am I going to do with the next 25 years?
Yeah.
Now, I will tell you, my mom is one of 10, and all 10 siblings are still doing fine. They're doing
Wow.
well. And I think the oldest one is 88 or so, and my mom's 84. So yeah, they're all 10 of them still get together for breakfast,
That's
and
amazing.
yeah, it is absolutely amazing. Well, there you have it. That was my conversation with Dr. Jennie. One thing that I wanted to mention is that I agree with her that time management and communication are the foundational pillars to building that connectedness and empathy within your teams and the workplace. Dr. Jennie's key takeaway is that we should focus on what truly matters in your career journey, and don't climb that corporate ladder, which she says is an artificial corporate ladder, just because it's there. Question if it aligns with your goals and your values. She says life is short. We all know that. So prioritize what brings you fulfillment. Don't let those artificial constructs dictate your worth or your path. Great conversation with Dr. Jennie. Again, all of her contact information is going to be on the episode website. And if you haven't done so already, go ahead and review the promotion readiness checklist. That will tell you where you are in your career and how promotion ready you are. And also check out the Unlock the Leader Within. If you're watching us on YouTube, then you can scan the QR code over here. Otherwise, all the links will be also on the episode website. So with that, remember to be brave, be bold, and take action.